The polished floors of Covington Preparatory School for the Arts shone like dark mirrors, reflecting the expensive sneakers and sharp shoes of the students who hurried through them. This was a place of beautiful noise-singing scales from practice rooms, the screech of violin bows finding their way, the dramatic thump of modern dance from the gym. It smelled of lemonwood polish, old books, and ambition. Right now, most of that ambition seemed to be concentrated in a young man walking down the main hallway. He moved with a confidence that was more than just walk. It was a performance. His clothes were casual, but clearly costly, each piece chosen to look effortless. A few other students, a boy and two girls, trailed beside and behind him, laughing a little too loudly at his jokes. He was the center of their small universe. His name was Leo, and he was a senior. To say he was a pianist was like saying a shark swims. It was what he did, but it also defined his place in the world. His mother was a famous concert pianist, his father a respected composer. Music wasn't just in his blood, it was the family business, and he was being groomed to take over. He played with a technical skill that made his teachers nod in approval, though some of the older ones would sometimes look at him, pause, and say nothing. He was good. He knew he was good, and the school, in many ways, confirmed it for him every day. They were heading toward the senior lounge, a privilege Leo enjoyed. As they rounded a corner near the main auditorium, their path was suddenly blocked, not by another student, but by a large, wheeled bucket with a mop handle sticking out of it, and beside it, a man on his knees. He was an older man, his hair more gray than not, wearing the simple, dark blue uniform of the school's maintenance staff. He was focused on his task, which was polishing the large brass plaque that listed the names of major donors to the arts program. In his hand was a soft cloth, and he was working it into the intricate grooves of the letters with a patient, careful rhythm. He didn't see them coming. Leo, not breaking his stride, had to sidestep sharply to avoid kicking the bucket. His fine leather shoe squeaked on the wet floor. He stopped, and his little group stopped with him. A ripple of annoyance went through him. This was his space, his hallway, in his school. The man was an obstacle, a piece of the scenery that had inconveniently moved. "Hey, watch it," Leo said, his voice not loud, but sharp. It carried down the hall. The janitor looked up. His face was lined, not with hardness, but with the kind of wear that comes from a lot of quiet years. His eyes were a pale, watery blue. He held up a hand in a mild, apologetic gesture. "Sorry about that, son. Almost done here." But as he moved the cloth, the edge of it, damp with polish, brushed lightly against the toe of Leo's shoe, leaving a faint, smeary mark. That was it. The spark. Leo looked down at his shoe, then back at the man, who was already pulling out a dry part of the cloth to fix the smudge. Something about the man's calm, about the way he called him son, about the entire interruption of his important journey to the lounge, boiled up inside Leo. Here was a man who wiped floors, touching his shoe. In front of his friends, he didn't raise his voice. Instead, he made it colder, clearer, so every word would land. "You need to be more careful," Leo said, his eyes locked on the janitor. "This is a school for artists, a place for creating something beautiful. You're just here to clean up the dirt afterwards." The words hung in the air. One of the girls in his group gasped, but it was a small, almost excited sound. Another boy smirked. They were watching Leo perform. Now, a different kind of performance. The janitor paused. He slowly got to his feet, his knees making a soft cracking sound. He was taller than Leo had expected. He didn't look angry. He looked tired, and in his eyes, for just a second, there was a flicker of something else. Something deep and old that Leo was too young to recognize as pain. The man looked directly at Leo, and the look was so steady, so knowing, that Leo felt a tiny, uncomfortable itch between his shoulders. But the man just nodded once, a slow, accepting dip of his head. "You're right," he said, his voice a low rumble. "It needs to be clean for the artists." He said the word artists without any tone at all. It was just a word. He then turned away, back to his bucket. He picked up his mop, wrung it out with strong, practiced hands, and began to swab the spot on the floor where Leo had stood, erasing the scuff mark from his shoe. It was a dismissal, a quiet, complete one. He had shrunk back into his role, becoming part of the background again, the silent, unnoticed man who kept their world shining. Leo stood there for a second, the expected victory feeling hollow. The janitor hadn't argued. He hadn't gotten flustered. He had just absorbed the insult and gone back to work. It was unsatisfying. "Whatever," Leo muttered to his friends, forcing a laugh. "Come on, let's go." The air is better in the lounge." He led them away, his shoulders stiff. He didn't look back. If he had, he might have seen the janitor stop mopping for a moment. The man's hand would have rested on the handle, his gaze distant, fixed on nothing. He might have taken a slow, deep breath, as if steadying himself against a memory. And then he would have continued his work. The steady asterisk swish, swish asterisk of the mop, the only sound in the now empty hall. The janitor's name was Henry, and for him, the sound of the mop on the wet floor was a rhythm. It was a simple, honest rhythm, unlike the complex, furious rhythms that used to live in his hands and haunt his dreams. He preferred this one now. It asked nothing of him but to be steady. It was a rhythm that helped him forget, and remembering was the one thing he tried never to do in these bright, noisy hallways filled with young, talented kids like Leo, kids who thought art was something you owned, instead of something that, sometimes, owned you. The air in Covington Preparatory School was always thick in the days leading up to a big show, but this was different. This was panic. The Young Virtuoso Showcase was the biggest event of the spring semester. It was where the most gifted students performed for a packed house of proud parents, serious music scouts, and stern-faced alumni who wrote the checks that kept the lights on. For a senior like Leo, it was his final bow, his last chance to cement his legacy before heading off to a prestigious conservatory. His piece was a monster of modern, complex composition by a living composer, full of crashing chords and frantic, racing passages up and down the keyboard. It was meant to sound difficult, to impress with its sheer athleticism. Leo had practiced it until his fingers ached, mastering every note, every dynamic marking. He was ready, but the piano was not. It was the school's crown jewel, a grand piano so rare and beautifully crafted it had its own nameplate on the side. It was usually kept in perfect condition, tuned and cared for like a priceless racehorse. But yesterday, during the final dress rehearsal, a problem had appeared. A ghost in the machine. Whenever the sustain pedal was pressed, a faint, ugly buzz would hum from deep inside the instrument, like a trapped wasp. It wasn't constant, but it was random enough to ruin any quiet, sustained chord. And Leo's piece had many of them. The school's regular piano tuner, a cheerful man with gentle hands, was out of town for a family wedding. A replacement had been called, a technician from the city, but he had taken one look inside the piano, whistled low, and said he'd need special tools he didn't have with him. He wouldn't be back until tomorrow afternoon. The performance was tonight. Leo stood on the empty stage, hitting a single key over and over, pressing the pedal, asterisk clang, buzz, clang buzz, asterisk each time. The discordant vibration felt like a needle in his ear. His music teacher, a normally unflappable woman with her hair in a tight bun, was pacing the aisles of the auditorium, phone pressed to her ear, her voice tight with stress. There must be someone else, anyone. The head of the music department, a tall man with a perpetual frown, stood with his arms crossed, staring at the piano as if it had betrayed him personally. We cannot have Leo perform on a defective instrument. It would be a disaster for him and for the school's reputation. Leo felt a cold knot forming in his stomach. All that work, all that expectation, to be undone by a buzz. He kicked the leg of the piano bench, a childish gesture he immediately regretted. In all this drama, no one noticed the quiet figure at the back of the auditorium. He moved slowly, methodically, down the center aisle with a large green trash bag in one hand and one of those long-handled pick-up tools in the other. He was collecting the litter left behind from the frantic rehearsals: empty water bottles, crumpled sheet music, a forgotten hair tie. It was Henry, the janitor. He worked with a soft efficiency, not looking at the stage, absorbed in his simple task. As he reached the front row, Leo's teacher ended her call with a defeated sigh. Nothing. No one can come in time. The department head ran a hand over his face. What about the Steinberg in the choir room? We could move it. It's half the size. The tone is completely wrong for his piece, and the movers would charge a fortune with zero notice. The teacher replied, her voice cracking. It's impossible. A soft, raspy voice cut through the tension. The graph is loose. Everyone turned. Henry had paused his cleaning. He was looking not at them, but at the piano on stage. His head was slightly tilted, as if listening to a distant sound. I'm sorry, the department head said. Irritation sharpened his voice. Henry blinked, seeming to realize he had spoken aloud. He gestured vaguely toward the stage with his pickup tool. The piano, the buzz. It's not the string itself. It's the graph, the little guide that holds the string in place near the tuning pins. For the middle C string, I think. The felt strip underneath it is probably worn down or shifted. When you press the pedal, the string vibrates against the metal, not the felt. That's the buzz. A heavy silence fell over the auditorium. Leo, his teacher, and the department head just stared. Henry looked from one stunned face to another, then slowly bent to pick up a discarded program from the floor, as if to hide from their gaze. How could you possibly know that? The music teacher finally asked, her voice full of wonder, not accusation. Henry shrugged, a small, stiff movement. I've been around pianos a long time. You hear things. The department leader was skeptical. His eyes narrowed. You're saying you can fix a $250,000 instrument? I'm saying I can look, Henry corrected gently. If it's what I think, it's a simple adjustment. If it's not, I stop. I won't touch anything important. There was another long pause. The clock was ticking. They had no other options. The teacher looked at the department head, a silent plea in her eyes. He gave a curt, desperate nod. All right, the teacher said. Please, take a look. Henry didn't hurry. He placed his trash bag and tool carefully on a seat. He walked up the 3 steps to the stage with a deliberate pace. Leo watched him, a mix of disbelief and a strange, fragile hope twisting inside him. This was the man he'd mocked for having dirty rags. Now, that man was approaching the most precious object in Leo's world. Henry didn't sit at the bench. He went straight to the piano, opening the top lid and propping it up. He peered inside, his eyes scanning the intricate forest of strings, hammers, and pins. He didn't touch anything for a full minute. He just looked. Then, from the deep pocket of his maintenance trousers, he pulled out a small, flat, leather case. It was worn smooth with age. He unzipped it, revealing a set of specialized tools, a tuning lever, a few felt strips of different thicknesses, some small, strange-looking wrenches. They were old, but meticulously clean. Leo and the adults gathered closer, watching in silence. Henry's hands, which usually held a mop or pushed a trash cart, were now moving with a surgeon's precision. They were large hands, with knuckles slightly swollen and veins standing out, but they were steady, absolutely steady. He located the specific string, found the tiny, offending piece of brass graph. With a tool that looked like a miniature screwdriver, he made a minute adjustment, tightening it just a fraction. Then, he selected a thin strip of fresh felt from his kit, trimmed it with a small pair of scissors, and slid it neatly into place underneath. Try it now, he said, his voice barely above a whispered. Leo, his heart pounding, stepped forward. He sat on the bench, his fingers hovering over the keys. He found middle C and played it, pressing the sustain pedal all the way down. The note rang out into the quiet auditorium, pure, clean, no buzz. He played a chord, then another, working through the most problematic section of his piece. The sound was rich, flawless, resonant. The ghost was gone. The music teacher let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for hours. The department head's stern face softened into open-mouthed surprise. Leo looked up from the keys at Henry, who was already closing his toolkit, wiping a spot on the piano's frame with his cloth out of pure habit. How did you? Leo began, but the words wouldn't come. Henry just gave that same, small, unreadable smile. Like I said, I've been around them a long time. He zipped up his leather case, tucked it back into his pocket, and walked down from the stage. He picked up his trash bag and his grabber tool. It should hold for the performance, he said, nodding to the teacher. But your regular man should check it tomorrow, and before anyone could thank him properly, ask him any more questions, or even process what had just happened, he was gone. He slipped out the side door of the auditorium, back into the shadows of the hallway, leaving behind a perfectly tuned piano and a silence that was now filled with a deep, bewildered mystery. Leo stared at the empty doorway, then down at his own hands. He had spent years building his skill, his talent, his identity as a pianist, and in 10 minutes, a man with a trash bag and gentle, knowing hands had shown him how much he didn't understand. The cold knot in his stomach was gone, replaced by a slow, burning curiosity. Who was that man? The night of the Young Virtuoso showcase arrived, and the air in the Covington Preparatory Auditorium crackled with a different kind of electricity. It was a polished, expensive energy. The seats were filled with men in dark suits and women in elegant dresses, their perfumes and colognes mixing into a sweet, heavy cloud. Parents leaned forward, phones held high, their faces glowing with pride and anticipation. Important-looking guests from music colleges and arts foundations sat in the reserved rows, their expressions carefully neutral, taking notes on small pads of paper. Backstage, The atmosphere was pure, focused tension. Dancers stretched in silent corners, their muscles like coiled springs. A cellist tuned her instrument over and over, her eyes closed. Leo stood by himself, flexing his fingers, going over the tricky passages of his piece in his mind. He could feel the cool, smooth memory of the piano keys under his fingertips. The instrument was perfect now, thanks to that strange, quiet miracle from the janitor. He pushed the thought away. He needed to think about music, about technique, about impressing the people out there who could change his future. When his name was called, he walked onto the stage to a warm swell of applause. The spotlight was hot and bright, making the rest of the world disappear into a comfortable darkness. He sat at the majestic piano, took a breath, and began. He played perfectly. Every note was exactly where it was supposed to be. Every rhythm was precise, every dynamic shift executed as written. His hands flew across the keyboard with a powerful, athletic grace. It was a display of incredible control, of years of disciplined practice. The audience listened, rapt. When he struck the final, dramatic chord, the sound hung in the air for a second before the clapping began. It was strong, respectful applause. People nodded to each other. His music teacher, watching from the wings, gave a firm, satisfied nod. It was a success. But as Leo took his bow, smiling into the blinding light, a tiny, cold seed of doubt settled in his chest. The applause was polite, not passionate. He had heard that difference before. He had played without a single mistake, and yet, something had been missing. He couldn't name it, but he felt it. The performance had been like a brilliantly crafted machine, impressive in its function, but somehow empty at its core. He shoved the feeling down, ignoring it. He had been technically flawless. That was what mattered. The rest of the showcase passed in a blur of other performances. Finally, the head of the school gave a speech, thanking everyone, and the formal part of the evening was over. The audience rose from their seats, the noise level rising as people began to mingle in the aisles and the lobby, talking, laughing, congratulating each other. The pressure valve had been released. Leo felt a sudden need to be away from the crowd, from the hollow congratulations. He remembered he'd left his expensive phone charger plugged in behind the stage curtain, slipping away from a group of friends who were planning to go celebrate. He made his way back through the side door and onto the now darkened stage. The heavy main curtain was down, separating the stage from the empty auditorium. The only light came from a single, dim work lamp off to the side, casting long, deep shadows. The grand piano sat like a sleeping beast in the gloom, and there, beside it, was a figure. It was the janitor, Henry. He was alone. In the quiet, empty vastness of the stage, he looked smaller, but also more real somehow. He wasn't hurrying. He had a fresh, soft yellow cloth in his hands, and he was slowly, carefully, wiping down the piano's glossy black surface. He wasn't just cleaning it. He was carrying asterisk for it. His movements were slow, almost tender. He polished each key individually, running the cloth along the ivory and ebony. His touch so gentle it wouldn't have made a sound. He was whispering something too low to hear, maybe to the piano, maybe to himself. In the silent, shadowy space, it looked like a private ritual, a goodbye. Leo stopped, hidden in the deep shadows near the wings. He watched for a moment, and the old feeling from the hallway washed back over him, a mix of annoyance and a strange superiority. This man, in his simple blue uniform, was touching the instrument Leo had just used to demonstrate his own greatness. The contrast felt wrong to Leo, almost offensive. A cruel, impulsive idea sparked in his mind. It was the perfect way to shake off his own lingering dissatisfaction, to feel powerful again. He ducked back out the side door. In the bustling lobby, he spotted his group of friends, the same ones from the hallway. "Hey," he said, a mischievous grin on his face. "You gotta see this. Come on." Quiet, intrigued, they followed him back through the door and into the wings of the stage. He put a finger to his lips, pointing. There Henry still was, now carefully closing the piano's lid, his hand resting on it for a long moment. Leo stepped out of the shadows, his friends giggling softly behind him. He made his footsteps loud on the wooden stage. Well, Leo said, his voice echoing in the hollow space. He kept his tone light, mocking, giving it a final polish, making sure all my brilliance is wiped off properly. Henry froze. His back, still turned to them, went very still. Leo walked closer, feeling the eyes of his friends on him, feeding his confidence. "You know, you really take your job seriously. I'll give you that. But a word of advice?" He stopped a few feet away. "This isn't a piece of furniture. It's an instrument. For artists, you can clean the outside all you want, but you'll never understand what happens on the inside. One of his friends snorted a laugh. It was the sound Leo wanted. Slowly, Henry turned around. The dim light from the work lamp caught his face. He didn't look angry. He didn't look embarrassed. The tiredness Leo had seen before was gone, replaced by something else entirely. It was a deep, profound sadness. It was a sadness so complete and heavy that it seemed to fill the entire stage. His eyes, in that moment, were like windows into a place of immense quiet and old, weathered pain. He looked directly at Leo, and for the first time, Leo felt truly seen. Not as a talented student, not as a star, but as a young man, small and foolish in a vast, dark room. The smirk died on Leo's face. Henry's gaze held his for a long, uncomfortable second. Then, his eyes drifted past Leo, to the empty, shadowy seats of the auditorium, as if remembering a different time, a different crowd. He looked back at the piano keys, now hidden under the closed lid. A quiet sigh escaped him, a sound of resignation, but also of a decision being made. He didn't say a word to Leo. Instead, he turned back to the piano. With a calm that felt monumental, he pulled the bench out. He sat down. He adjusted his posture, and as he did, his whole body seemed to change. The stoop in his shoulders straightened. The careful, slow movements became purposeful, poised. He lifted the fallboard, revealing the keys once more. He placed his hands in his lap for a moment, those work-worn hands with their swollen knuckles. He took a slow, deep breath, closing his eyes. The giggling from Leo's friends had stopped dead. The only sound was the distant, muffled murmur of the crowd in the lobby. Then, Henry laid his hands on the keys. And the world changed. The first note was not what anyone expected. It wasn't a loud, showy crash to grab attention. It was a single, deep note from the lower part of the piano, played so softly it seemed to vibrate up from the floorboards themselves. It hung in the air, a question, a sigh made of sound. Then another note joined it, then a chord, rich and complex and full of a feeling so deep it was almost a physical weight in a dark room. This wasn't playing. This was something else entirely. Leo felt the breath stop in his chest. His mind, so used to analyzing technique, the finger position, the pedal work, the tempo, went completely blank. This was beyond technique. The music that flowed from the old janitor's hands was a story of love and terrible loss, of joy that had once been bright as sunlight and a sadness so profound. It felt endless. It was Chopin's Ballade No. 1. But Leo didn't know that. He only knew it was the most beautiful, heartbreaking thing he had ever heard. Henry's body was no longer that of a tired cleaner. It was an extension of the instrument. His shoulders moved with the rising phrases. His head bowed gently over the keys during the tender, whispering passages. His face, in the dim light, was a landscape of concentration and feeling. The music began to build, the left hand setting up a rolling, stormy rhythm like a heartbeat galloping out of control, while the right hand danced over it with melodies that were by turns tragic, furious, and pleading. One of Leo's friends, the one who had snorted the laugh, took an involuntary step backward, his mouth hanging open. The other two stood frozen, their earlier smirks replaced by looks of pure awe. They were musicians, too. They understood, on some level, the impossible skill they were witnessing, the speed and clarity of the runs, the voicing of chords where every single note sang out with perfect balance, the subtle use of the pedals to create layers of shimmering sound. It was masterful. But more than that, it was alive. Leo couldn't move. He felt as if his bones had turned to ice. His own performance, which he had been so proud of just minutes before, now played back in his memory. It sounded like what it was. A series of correct notes. It was a photograph. This, coming from Henry, was a living, breathing person. It had sweat and tears and memory in it. The difference was so vast it was humiliating. It was devastating. The music swelled to its first great climax, a torrent of sound that seemed to shake the very dust in the rafters. It was powerful, but it wasn't angry. It was passionate, a cry from the soul. Then, just as suddenly, it pulled back, collapsing into a section of fragile, hesitant beauty that was somehow even more powerful. It sounded like someone trying to remember a happy dream while drowning in sorrow. Leo's eyes stung. He didn't understand why. He looked at Henry's hands. They flew across the keyboard, but they didn't look like the precise tools Leo trained his own to be. They looked like they were asterisk speaking asterisk. The swollen knuckles, the veins, the scars from a lifetime of work. They weren't flaws. They were part of the music. The strength in them gave weight to the powerful chords. The tenderness in their touch brought the soft melodies to life. These hands had fixed sinks and pushed mops and polished floors, and now they were creating a universe of sound. The piece raced toward its famous, furious finale. The pace became breakneck, a whirlwind of notes, a desperate, chaotic dance. Henry's body was coiled with energy. Every part of him focused on channeling the storm. The sound filled every corner of the empty auditorium, crashing against the seats and flooding back over them. It was overwhelming. It was glorious. And then, the final, pounding chords. They weren't loud for the sake of being loud. They were final. They were the end of a long, hard journey. The last note echoed, and Henry's hands fell still, resting gently on the keys for a moment as the sound faded into a ringing silence. It was a silence thicker than any Leo had ever known. No one breathed. The distant noise from the lobby was gone, swallowed by what they had just experienced. Henry slowly lifted his hands. He let them rest in his lap for a moment. His head bowed. He seemed smaller again, the immense presence that had inhabited him receding like a tide. With a calm that felt almost sacred, he reached out and gently closed the fallboard over the keys. The soft click of the latch was deafening in the quiet. He stood up from the bench. He didn't look at Leo or his friends. He simply pushed the bench back under the piano with the same careful motion he used to put away his cleaning cart. He was just an old man again, in a worn blue uniform, standing on a dark stage. But he was not the same man. He could never be that man again. Not to the people who had witnessed this. The janitor had disappeared, and in his place, for those few minutes, had stood an artist of a kind they had only read about in books, and now the artist was gone, leaving the shell of the janitor behind, looking suddenly very, very tired. The spell broke. One of the girls let out a shaky breath she'd been holding. The boy who had stepped back wiped quickly at his eyes, pretending he hadn't. Leo was the first to move. His legs felt stiff, like he'd been standing for years. He took one step forward, then another. His heart was hammering against his ribs, not with pride or anger, but with a terrifying mixture of shame and a desperate, hungry need to understand. He stopped a few feet from Henry, who was now just looking at the closed piano, his back to them. Leo's voice, when he finally found it, didn't sound like his own. It was a rough, broken whisper, stripped of all its cool confidence. Who he started, but the word cracked. He swallowed, tried again. Who ***you? Henry didn't turn around immediately. He reached out and smoothed an invisible speck of dust from the piano's lid, a final, automatic gesture of care. Then, slowly, he turned to face Leo. The profound sadness was still there in his eyes, but now it was mixed with a kind of weary peace, as if a burden had been shared, even if just for a moment. He looked at Leo, really looked at him, and for the first time, there was no wall between them, no student and janitor, just two people in a dark room. "It doesn't matter who I was," Henry said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper that seemed to hold the echo of the music. That was a long time ago. But Leo just stared, waiting, his whole world tilted on its axis. Needing an answer, Henry saw the genuine shock, the shattered pride, the raw question in the young man's face. He sighed, a sound of surrender. "Once," he began, his gaze drifting back to the piano. "A very long time ago, I played for people in big halls, like this one." The simple words fell like stones into the silent space. Leo felt his knees go weak. Big halls. This wasn't just a former piano teacher or a retired choir director. This was something else, entirely. Henry continued, his voice so quiet they all had to lean in to hear. The music, it was everything. But the world around it, the noise, the people, the pressure, it started to feel like a cage. It stopped being a voice and started being a trick, a performance. He paused, choosing his words carefully. And then there was a loss, a deep one. And the music, when I tried to play it after that, it brought the pain up to close. I couldn't find the joy in it anymore, only the ache. He looked at his own hands, turning them over as if seeing them for the first time. I found I liked the quiet. I liked work that asked only for my hands, not my soul. Work where I could be near these beautiful things, he said, nodding toward the piano, and care for them, without having to tear my own heart out every night to make them sing. He finally looked back at Leo, and his eyes were clear. "So, that's who I am, a man who fixes things that are broken, and polishes things that are beautiful, and tries to live a quiet life." The explanation was simple, but it contained a universe of feeling. Leo understood. In a flash, the difference between his own playing and what he had just heard. He had been performing notes, Henry had been breathing a lifetime into them. The music wasn't outside of him, it was him and the cost of that had been too high. In that moment, Leo's own ambition, his desire for applause and recognition, felt cheap and small. He looked down at the floor, unable to hold the old man's gaze. The words came out before he could stop them, soft and filled with a regret he had never felt before. I'm sorry for what I said." In the hall, Henry considered him for a long moment. Then he gave a small, slow nod, not of forgiveness, exactly, more an acknowledgement, a receiving of the words. "Your piece tonight," Henry said, his tone shifting, becoming almost teacherly. "The notes were perfect. You have magnificent control." He paused, and his next words were gentle, but they landed on Leo with the weight of truth. "But music isn't about control, son. It's about surrender. You have to let it speak through you, even if what it says hurts." He picked up his yellow polishing cloth from where it lay on the piano. He gave the instrument one last, long look, a silent conversation passing between man and machine. Then, without another word, he walked past the stunned group of students, his footsteps soft on the stage. He opened the side door, and a slice of bright light and chatter from the lobby spilled in. Then he was gone, the door sighing shut behind him, leaving them alone in the dark with the ghost of the music and the crushing weight of what they had just learned. For a long time after the janitor left, no one on the dark stage moved or spoke. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full. It was filled with the echoes of the music and the heavy weight of the truth that had just been shared. The beautiful, crushing notes seemed to have painted the air itself, leaving a feeling that lingered like the scent of rain. Leo finally turned to look at his friends. Their faces, pale in the dim backstage light, mirrored the stunned confusion he felt inside. The boy who had laughed the hardest earlier now looked like he might be sick. The girl who had gasped in the hallway had tears drying on her cheeks. There were no jokes left, no clever remarks. The performance they had just witnessed had stripped all of that away. "Did that really happen?" one of them whispered, the sound too loud in the quiet. Leo didn't answer. He walked slowly to the piano and put a hand on its cool, glossy lid. It was just an object again. Wood, wire, and ivory. But now he knew the magic it could hold, and the kind of hands that could wake it up. His own hands, which he had always thought were so skilled, felt clumsy and young. He knew he couldn't just go back to the party in the lobby. The laughter and the congratulations would feel like a lie now. He mumbled something to his friends and slipped out a different door, into the empty, echoing halls of the school. He needed to be alone. He needed to think. The next few days at school were strange. The story of what had happened on the stage spread, but in whispers and confused pieces. Most people didn't believe it. They thought it was an exaggerated rumor, a silly story made up by seniors. The old janitor, a piano genius? Yeah, right. Leo heard the dismissive laughs in the cafeteria. A week ago, he would have been the one leading them. But he didn't laugh. He couldn't. He found himself watching. He would see Henry from a distance, pushing his wide trash cart down a corridor, or on his knees, scrubbing a scuff mark from the floor. The man moved with the same quiet, unhurried pace as before. He didn't look like a maestro. He looked like a tired man doing a hard job. But Leo saw him differently now. He saw the straightness of his posture when he paused to listen to a student, practicing from a nearby room. He saw the way his eyes would sometimes go distant, as if hearing a different song in his head. The apology Leo had muttered on the stage felt tiny, worthless. It sat in his stomach like a stone. He knew words weren't enough. But what could he do? One afternoon, about a week later, Leo was in a practice room, struggling. He was trying to learn a new piece, a sonata by Beethoven. It was technically within his ability, but it felt dead under his fingers. He was hitting all the right notes, but the music was stiff wooden. He played a passage over and over, growing more frustrated with each attempt. It sounded empty. It sounded like him in his anger. He slammed his hands down in a discordant crash on the keys. The ugly noise echoed in the small room. He put his head in his hands, feeling defeated. A soft knock on the door's window made him jump. He looked up. It was Henry. He was holding a large ring of keys and a bottle of glass cleaner, clearly on his rounds. His expression was unreadable. For a second, they just looked at each other through the glass. Leo felt a hot flush of shame. He expected Henry to just move on. Instead, the older man pointed gently at the door handle, asking if he could come in. Leo, his heart suddenly pounding, nodded and got up to open the door. Henry stepped inside, filling the small room with his quiet presence. He didn't say anything about the crashing chord. He just looked at the piano, then at Leo. "Stuck?" Henry asked, his voice a low rumble. Leo could only nod, his throat tight. Henry moved into the room and stood by the piano. He didn't sit. "This piece, it's a conversation," he said, his eyes on the sheet music. "See here?" He pointed a thick, calloused finger at a line of notes. "This phrase, it's a question. It's uncertain, searching. And this," he moved his finger down the page, "this is the answer. But it's not a happy answer. It's resigned. It's sad." Leo stared. He had only seen the notes, the rhythms, the fingerings. He had never heard a asterisk conversation asterisk. "Play the question," Henry said simply, hesitantly. Leo played the first phrase. It came out neat and clean, and completely emotionless. Henry shook his head slowly. "Too clean, too sure of itself. A question isn't sure." He reached out with one hand, hovering over the keys but not touching them. "Let the timing breathe here. Slow it down, just a hair. And this note," he tapped the music again, "don't hit it. Let it fall. It's a sigh." Leo tried again. He focused less on perfect accuracy and more on the feeling Henry described. He let the timing stretch. He softened the attack on the key. When he finished the phrase, it sounded different. It sounded human. A small, almost invisible nod from Henry. "Better. Now, the answer." Leo played the response. Henry listened, then stopped him. "No, you're playing it like it's a victory. It's not. It's acceptance. It's heavier. Use the weight of your arm, not just your fingers. Let the sound sink into the piano." It was the most intimate lesson Leo had ever received. It wasn't about technique. It was about meaning. It was about listening to what the music was trying to say before you tried to say it yourself. For 20 minutes, Henry stood there, patiently guiding him, using simple, clear words that cut right to the heart of the music. He never touched the piano. He didn't need to. His understanding of it was so deep he could teach it from the air. When the school's end-of-day bell rang, startling them both, Leo had only gotten through a few lines of the piece. But those few lines were alive in a way none of his music had been before. Henry picked up his cleaning bottle and keys. The lesson was over. "Thank you," Leo said, the words feeling deeply inadequate. Henry paused at the door. He looked back, and for the first time, Leo thought he saw a tiny, faint light in those weary blue eyes. Not happiness, exactly, but maybe a flicker of purpose. "It's in there," Henry said, nodding toward the piano, and then, surprisingly, toward Leo's own chest. "You just have to stop telling it what to do, and start listening to what it wants to say." He left, closing the door softly behind him. That was the beginning. It became a quiet, unspoken ritual. A few afternoons a week, when the halls were mostly empty, Leo would be in a practice room. Often, Henry would appear, as if by coincidence. He would listen for a moment from the hallway, then sometimes knock, sometimes just lean in the doorway. The lessons were never long. Henry would offer a few sentences, a different way to see a passage, a story about what the composer might have been feeling. He spoke of music as a living thing, with breath and pulse and heartache. Leo stopped playing just to impress people. He started playing to understand. He practiced the feeling of a phrase, not just the notes. He learned that silence between notes was just as important as the sound. He began to hear the music in his head before he played it, a full, emotional soundscape. He also started to see Henry, the man. He learned he loved black coffee, strong and unsweetened, that he had a fondness for watching the birds outside the library window, that his quiet wasn't emptiness, but a space filled with old thoughts and a hard-won peace. Leo never asked about his past life on the stage again. He didn't need to. He heard it in every piece of wisdom Henry shared. One afternoon, months later, Leo was working on the same Chopin ballade he had heard Henry play that life-changing night. He was attempting just the opening section. He played it slowly, focusing on the deep, sorrowful beauty of it. He didn't get far before he made a mistake, fumbling a chord. From the doorway, Henry's voice came, soft, not so solemn right at the start. "It's not a funeral march. It's the memory, a bittersweet memory. The sadness comes later, when you realize you can't go back." Leo looked up. Henry was leaning against the doorframe, a faint, almost smile on his face. It was the closest Leo had ever seen him come to looking content. "Will I ever be able to play it?" Leo asked, not meaning just the notes. Henry was quiet for a moment. "Maybe, if you live enough life first." The music will wait for you." He pushed himself off the doorframe to continue his rounds. As he walked away, Leo called out, softly, "Henry." The man turned. "Thank you," Leo said. It was for everything. For the lessons. For the forgiveness he never explicitly gave. For showing him what real music was. Henry held his gaze for a long moment. Then he gave a single, slow nod. It was an acknowledgement. A passing of a tiny, fragile torch. That was their last lesson. The school year ended soon after. Leo graduated, and his path led him to a good music school, just as he'd always planned. But he went there as a different person, not as the arrogant star, but as a student in the truest sense of the word, someone who knew how much he didn't know. He never saw Henry again. He heard, a year later, that the old janitor had retired and moved away to be closer to a sister in another state. But Leo carried him. In every piece he played, he sought the conversation, the heartbeat, the story. He learned to surrender to the music, to let it speak through him, even when it hurt. And on the rare occasions when he played something that truly connected, when he felt that deep, resonant truth in the keys, he would think of the man in the blue uniform. He would remember that the greatest masterpiece isn't always the one performed under the bright lights for thunderous applause. Sometimes, it's the quiet lesson taught in an empty room. The moment a young man learned that true artistry isn't about being seen, but about learning how.